If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Just got done watching another exciting playoff baseball game, Tigers and Guardians. Yes, this is a Pirates podcast, but obvious if we're Pirates fans, I mean, most of the people that are doing podcasts, most of the people that are this invested and involved in the Pirates are baseball fans in general. I love watching great baseball. These playoffs have been nothing but great baseball. I'm a little bit jealous in some ways, but I also do get excited for those fan bases. Scott, I know you've been watching it as well. How you doing, brother? And what's your thoughts on these playoff games and the playoffs in general so far?
Well, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and imagine what PNC Park would look like if O'Neal Cruz hit a game-winning grand slam to advance like Francisco Lindor did, and how nuts PNC Park would go. And hopefully, someday in the near future, we will get to feel that energy because these games, this whole playoff has been electric and great underdog story, except for the Mets. Nobody can ever call them an underdog when they're spending that kind of money. But to see teams like the Tigers and the Guardians, the Royals are putting up a fight. There's hope for teams that are in similar situations as the Pirates find themselves.
Yeah, and I always look back to, I mean, I think we even brought this up last week or maybe even the week before, as the Tigers being in almost kind of the same position as the Pirates, or actually below the Pirates, late in the season. And, before we hopped on here, talking about the fact that the Tigers are doing this not with their, big name acquisitions, not with the players that they signed in the offseason, because I mean, they were sellers at the deadline. I mean, that's how crazy this whole scenario is with them and catching that lightning in a bottle. And especially with these, expanded playoffs, I mean, not all of these teams would be getting in there. And it would be, a team that got hot towards the end of the season and would be, looking forward to spring training because, you ended the season on a high note. But these are teams that have gotten to push into the playoffs. I mean, winning begets winning. Teams that start hitting well, hitting is contagious. I mean, all of these things that are said in, somewhat tongue in cheek to a degree, they are built on a little bit of fact. Because when teams do hit those hot streaks, it's like a story. It's like, a fable or a myth. It's like all these things are rooted in at least somewhat fact to a degree. They kind of get twisted throughout history. It's like a game of telephone or whatever it would be with your friends. But yeah, I mean, some of this is that, even with the Mets weren't playing great baseball, and a giant purple grimace comes out and throws a baseball, and next thing you know, they have theme songs and catchphrases, and they're celebrating with grimace. So I mean, this is stuff that, I mean, unfortunately, as a medium, small market, small revenue, medium revenue type team, it's the types of things that you have to wish for. And I think that's where some of the envy for me comes in, is that, I mean, a team like the Guardians and a team like the Tigers and the Royals to a certain degree, those are the teams that we are kind of modeled after. And if something's going to happen, it's almost like that has to happen for us.
Yeah, well, we can only hope that the Cincinnati Reds become historically bad like the White Sox and maybe give us a little advantage like those teams. But you just have to make it to the dance because any team can get hot. I was thinking this week, we had talked before about how this season felt disappointing because the Pirates finished on the downslide, whereas last year they finished on an upswing. Imagine if that team last year would have stayed close. You just got to hang in there. And if they would have been able to make one of those playoff spots, those expanded playoff spots, with the way Oviedo was pitching and Keller was kind of doing okay at the end there, maybe that's a team like like the Tigers could have got hot and made a little bit of a run, even though they didn't have a great beginning of the year. But to your point, you just have to hang close. Think of the Nationals, the year that they won the World Series. I remember people had them counted out early. So it's a long series, long season. It's a marathon. You got to survive the marathon to make it to the sprint, and you got to get hot at the right time. And good news for Pirates fans. Something that is very important for getting hot in the playoffs is pitching. And that's something that the Pirates have as a very key building block for the future. And so they're dangerous. Just like I think it was John Smoltz that said it earlier in the season when the Pirates were still in it. And nobody wants to face Skeens, Jones, Keller, in a short series. And so if they just make it to the dance, any team can get hot.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this beforehand, and we did talk about it because I work it out in my brain because I mean it kind of has become like a cry for Pirates fans that they want to see, or at least I've read, certain Pirates fans. I don't want to speak for everybody. It's like, okay, well, if the big market teams, continue to win, then frustration will grow, and that's where change will be enacted, for these smaller market, lower revenue teams. And that's when like a salary cap will come in. That's when a salary floor will come in. But, I was watching the Tigers, play the Guardians tonight, two, medium to small market, small revenue teams don't put a ton of money in. I mean, we've seen the Guardians spend obviously more than the Pirates. They're more of like a Reds to Brewers spender at times, but more it's like, okay, we build, developmentally through pitching, we get some hot hitters, and that type of stuff. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, no, I'm thinking back to the NHL when they went on their strike and when the salary cap came into play there. It was teams like, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Rangers, the teams that were spending a ton of money, basically saying, why are we spending all this money, to not eventually win it, to not get all of this extra revenue, from winning the World Series or winning playoff series. I mean, you're seeing it with like a team, like Houston. I mean, Houston has been in the playoffs a decent amount of times here, but I mean, it hasn't made a ton of deep runs. I mean, a lot of those are, one and done type things, and you're getting knocked off and knocked out by these teams with these minuscule payrolls. And it's basically saying, so why are we funding your playoff runs? Why are we funding your success? And it's not even at that point in time, it's not even great success. We're funding your 80 some wins to squeak into the playoffs while we're spending all of this money to win, 90 some games, 100 games in the regular season, and then coming up empty handed. It's going to have to come down to those types of teams. And I believe that, I mean, in some ways, I mean, we've seen, the Yankees cut back on their salary at time, making trades to get under those, luxury tax thresholds. The Red Sox basically, bringing in Shane Bloom and cutting the payroll and just basically saying we're gonna, have to do this a different way. I mean, you've been bringing up to me in our messages for, I mean, at least the past couple of weeks here, the stuff that's going on with the Cardinals, which we didn't even plan on getting into tonight. But just, I've always called it, the cardinal way. And maybe that's, something that's, going by the wayside because they have been able to, you know, pay all of these older
Yeah.
players or bring in older players like you've said before, and make that over the top and infuse that with young players and have a fairly high, payroll. But I mean, they tried it this year, and honestly, like, bringing in, some pitchers that were a little bit older, giving a decent amount of
Yeah.
money to all of them, still having the contracts of Goldschmidt, Arenado, even though I know Colorado's eating some of that money, but just basically saying, this may not be the way to do things anymore when you have teams that are building up good systems
Right.
like the
Well,
Royals are doing.
the Cardinals have always been. I don't know why they get lumped into the small to medium market teams when they do spend money. And everybody seems to think that they're this, shining star of development, and they do. They have, players that come up that are productive, but they spend money. They're always over 100 plus. And to the point, like you were talking before, I think that there would be a way that sentiment in the national sphere would change things if the Dodgers went on a big run. If like the Dodgers won 5 in a row, but what you're talking about, where it comes internally, that's going to change things faster. But I think just from a X's and O's uh, numbers perspective, the ownership is going to be in favor of a cap because they don't want to spend more than they have to. It's the real change is going to have to come from the players union, and that's you need to shift the power there. Like we were talking before, the salary cap and a floor really is what's needed in professional baseball. But I think as long as you have the stars, if you have the Boris guys, the CAA guys, as long as those are the player reps that everything's getting funneled through, I just don't see how we're going to make the changes that are going to benefit teams like the Pirates, and you're going to see a more even distribution of these playoff spots. Because, as we were saying before, yeah, you have your Tigers, your Royals, your Guardians. They're in the playoffs this year, and it's always a few teams that are cycling in and out. Like your Rays are going to be in there sometimes. Your Marlins, they just ended a cycle where they were in. But you'll have those teams that will come and go in spurts of 2, 3 years. But then you're constantly, as long as the Dodgers can pay, triple what other teams are paying in payroll, and the Mets are over $300 million in payroll. As long as those teams continue to spend the way they are, they're going to be mainstays. They're not going to make it every single year, but they're going to threaten every single year, and they're going to be able to paper over any mistakes that they make. And it's just we're going to continue to have this imbalance unless something major happens. But we live in the world that we live right now, and we have to look at these teams that are having success now, the Tigers and such, and see how can we learn from what those teams are doing and apply that to our team so that we can ride that wave and maybe follow the leader and have more success and bring playoff baseball back to PNC Park.
And while you're talking, I mean, the thing that's like keeps on like flashing in my head, is Key Brian Hayes' contract. And to Pirates fans, it's like a death nail or it's like an omen that it's like if he's not successful, then this rebuild it could falter or could fail. And for teams like like I said, the Mets, the Yankees, the Dodgers, even the Cardinals to a degree, those teams like that, all they do is if he fails, they go out and they just buy another third baseman. They just bring in another free agent third baseman. If that guy doesn't work out, then they just keep on cycling through that. And I mean, I know that there's like, the big sentiment out there of like, Bob Nutting being cheap. And yes, I do believe I've always said that he could spend more, but he can't spend to the degree that these other teams are able to spend. Like That's like a fact. That's a hard, cold fact that people kind of get frustrated with is that I mean, I know that there are these protests and different things going on and I, retweeted what the guys were doing because I believe in what they're doing. I believe in them taking that step. I believe it's the Schwartz brothers. I'll throw their names out there because I mean they did go out in the cold. They did go out in like a
Yeah.
rainy or whatever it was and marched and I commend them for that,
Mhm.
but I don't. I'm also of the belief that if Nutting sells the team, then you will get Nutting 2.0 that
Right.
will come in and run the team to a similar degree. I believe that there will be some more spending right off the bat. I mean, we've seen it with the Orioles, who usually don't have an extremely large payroll. A new ownership comes in, and they start, going out and trying to get free agents or trading for players that have larger salaries and different stuff. You see, the Royals going out and spending, over the past couple of years. But I mean, talking to Orioles fans that I know personally, they know that at some point in time, this spending is going to come home to roost because they're going to have all of these players that are going to be up for arbitration, that are going to be up for extensions at the same time, and they're going to have to be picking and choosing, who to extend instead of being like the Dodgers. They can basically be like, okay, well, we traded for Mookie Betts, but then now we're going to give him this giant extension. We're going to go out and get Freddie Freeman, and then we're also going to go get we're going to go get Otani, but then everybody's thinking, well, then you're not going to get Yamamoto because you've already spent all this money. But it's like, you know what? We have unlimited amount of money,
Right.
so we're going to go get Yamamoto too. That they were
Massive
out
money
of,
thing like that.
those types of deals and stuff like that. So, I mean, to me, it's baseball itself, but then it's also, you know, there's that you have that you have to thread that eye of the needle. It's like ever so thin that you can't really make, a ton of those mistakes on who you're signing. But I mean, everybody likes to look back to, 13 through 15, and it's not like we didn't make, or I should say the Pirates didn't make mistakes there. I
Jose
mean,
Tabata.
Jose Tabata, I mean, Gregory Polanco, um, even, even though even Liriano on giving his, extension at that point in time, I mean, that was towards the end of what we didn't know was the death rattle of our window. It was closing. Um, but those ones, didn't really work out for the Pirates. And there was only, McCutcheon that was like, kind of one of the bigger extensions, that worked out for the team. So, I mean, you can overcome those. I'm not saying you can't, but it's just like looking at it and saying, I mean, you have to be almost almost perfect
Mhm.
in these types of scenarios to get to where you want to be and be in the position of the Tigers right now, who haven't won anything yet, but in the position to be competitive, or the Royals, back in like 2015 and 16.
Well, you don't get in the position to buy a baseball team by being a bad business person. So that's another thing that, well, hey, Mark Cuban, come buy the Pirates, and then you can throw millions and millions of dollars of your own money into the team so it can win. I just don't see successful business people throwing millions of dollars of their own personal money into a business venture that's not going to return that. And so you're right when you say a Bob Nutting 2.0, things might get a little bit better, and you might have a guy who's willing to take a little more risk. But as you point out with the Orioles, yeah, it's going to come back around. You might make that initial. That was the plan for the Mets. I've heard that Steve Cohen said we'll spend money up front until we can build our system up, and then plan on coming back down to earth a little bit. We'll see if that actually happens. But yeah, so you might have a new owner that comes in and maybe spends some money the first couple of years. And we've gone through cycles with that with the Pirates, where they decide, okay, we're going to spend some money in free agency. You go pick up Kenny Lofton and Reggie Sanders and Matt Stairs in an off season, or you go get a Jeremy Burnitz or something like that, and you spend some money, and you think, oh yeah, okay, this is really going to work out, and then it falls on its face again, and you end up back in the same spot that you were. I know that over the next few weeks, so I'm sure we'll be talking about available free agents and playing the what if game. But in a perfect world, the Pirates would go out and get a cornerstone first baseman to a 5 or 6 year contract. But you and I both know that that's not going to happen because of the risk that's involved there. What if you have a situation with, where he blows out his Achilles or a knee or something like that, and you're paying a guy $15 million a year that is really going to be a cornerstone of your lineup, and he gets hurt for an entire year, and then you got to play the game they played with O'Neal Cruz this year, where they have to manage his workload and watch, as he's coming back, and so you're essentially losing a year plus, and that's not gonna that's not gonna stand for any kind of ownership in this kind of market. So it's going to have to come down to a more even playing field. And I think that in the future, the key also that we haven't mentioned with this level playing field is going to be if Major League Baseball, with the death of regional sports networks, if they can, under one roof, bring all of the TV rights and more evenly distribute that money and manage that money, like, because that's something that the NFL has the benefit of, because you don't have regional NFL stations. It's all under one umbrella and they can more evenly distribute the money. So you have teams like the Dodgers who have huge TV deals that's able to float these huge payrolls, where the Pirates, while they're a well performing regional network, don't have the money coming in that can support the payrolls.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing is I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the Pirates like TV ratings.
Mhm.
Pirates get good ratings.
They do.
I mean, they do, and you would think that with all those years of losing and different stuff, it's just like no, like at least in my family, you go to a family gathering, the Pirate game is on at least in the background. Do you
Right.
know what I mean? Like it's at least on, so they do get good TV ratings, and yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. And all of this is, like I said, what we're talking about now is speculation and different types of stuff and getting some of our feelings, off our chest a little bit. But that's kind of what, the off season is about. But I mean, as we were sitting here, before we were recording, and even now, I just sit here and think, how do we get ourselves into the position to be one of those teams? And I mean, it kind of does start with the offseason. I mean, the Pirates are going to have, a little bit of money coming off the books, but I mean, we're also going to have some money coming onto the books. I mean, Mitch Keller is getting a little bit of a bump, in his salary for next year because he signed that extension. We had Mitch Keller on the absolute cheap, this year at around $5 million, going up to $15 million next year, which even at $15 million on the market,
Hmm.
is not a lot for, a 3 to 5 in the rotation or one of your five.
Who's going to take the
That's
ball every 5 days and give you the
yeah.
innings? And yeah.
But for the Pirates, I mean, that is a large chunk of change. That's why I kind of, even said, even when Aroldis Chapman was performing well, was it worth giving him $10.5 million to, provide you with, you know, reliever innings? Do you know what I mean? Like it's just was it worth that type of money? Was the return on investment, kind of going to be enough? I believe with Keller that by baseball standards, it's absolutely going to be enough. By Pirate standards, I don't know because we need players to overperform, their salaries. I mean, obviously, it is a benefit to the Pirates to have, a Paul Skeens who's going to be making like, league minimum, a Jared Jones who's going to be making the league minimum, Bailey Falter just hitting arbitration this year at like $2.8 million is the estimate right now. Luis Ortiz, not making a ton of money. So that stuff kind of helps it balance itself out. I mean, but right now, I mean, you're losing, looking at the free agents here. Let's just go to that first before we
Yeah.
get to arbitration and talk about money. Jalen Beeks, gone already. And the Rockies have have Luis Peralta for the next 6 years if they want. And that, like I said, I talked to you about this, and I had to bring it up again. It just frustrates me. You guys are going to hear it again when the Altoona Curve season recap comes off. It's just a frustrating trade to me. It just not that, and I had even told you this, Scott, and we agreed on it. Is that it's not that you know Luis Peralta was going to be like you knew he was going to be good, or he was going to be, what Bubba Chandler or Thomas Harris, but he was a good reliever in Double A, and we were struggling in the bullpen, and you give him up for a guy that is already out the door. But
Yeah, you go and get a rental, and you still end up with a losing record. It yeah, it just seems like a lost opportunity, especially for a franchise that values service time so much and having control of young arms for as long as possible to give up a guy that has some, opportunity, some upside for a guy who gave us a few months of wishy-washy pitching, and now he's gone for nothing.
yeah, yeah, and like I said, we were talking about before, for a guy that is so patient like Charrington to just make some of these like what I feel like are just haphazard moves that are just like very impulsive moves. For a guy that sits there and says, we're going to let Rowdy get, God knows how many plate appearances through the first couple months of the season because he's eventually going to work it out to then just pull a trigger on a player and just basically say, okay, yeah, we're going to trade him off. We're going to bring this guy in. It's very weird to me. Number two on the free agent, Ryan Baraki. Uh, didn't had a great season or end of the season last year, injured most of the season this year. I mean, that's he's one of those waiver wire guys. Dennis Santana is the new king on the block or whatever you want to call king of the hill. And Ryan Baraki didn't get to see that much of him this year. And it's not like the Pirates. I mean, other than Andrew McCutchen, who wants to come back, that when a guy becomes a free agent, the Pirates are, you know, not the first one knocking on their door to bring them back.
Right, I'm not sweating either of those guys. The bullpen is the arms are so easy to replenish, and they're hit or miss. You can just as easily pick up a waiver wire guy like Dennis Santana to give you production as going out and signing a free agent that's going to make a lot more money. So the bullpen, yeah, they're going to get replaced and probably on the cheap, and it may work out. But yeah, I'm not going to sweat either one of those guys. I wish Baraki could have stayed healthy this past year and shown us what he can really do. But maybe because of that, there's an opportunity to bring him back and give it another shot. But yeah, if they don't, I don't think it's a big loss.
Not losing much sleep over it.
No,
The one I'm not losing sleep over Aroldis Chapman becoming a free agent. I
good for
I
him.
honest I mean, here's the thing is he's going to get paid around the same of what he got paid. He set his own market now. The Pirates helped him set that market. Didn't have a completely dominant season, but was dominant enough during the parts of the season that there will be teams out there, that will give him another shot next year, and the salary will be near the same. And this is like I said, my head it's just kind of spinning to a degree. I think like it's almost like a washing machine. It just spins around, then whatever comes out is kind of what I say. But it's going back to one of those teams like the Baltimore Orioles when they knew they weren't, going to be, contenders. And they were still in it at the period of time a couple years ago. And they was it Trey Mancini, and they traded a couple other players to try to get some stuff back because they knew they weren't going to be in it. I really think that, the main reason you signed Aroldis Chapman was to trade him unless you knew that you were a complete competitor. And at that point in time, they weren't.
Yeah,
And they're obviously, especially after looking at what the market was for relief pitchers at that point in time, like I feel like that's a Charrington swing and miss right there, which people probably won't put against him because of how good Aroldis pitched for the last couple months of the season.
right. And I think that he plays it well because he just signs with a team like the Pirates or the Royals the year before, figuring, well, I'll get paid, and then though these teams won't be in it at the end. I'll get traded to a contender every year because he's going to be a sought after bullpen arm. The Pirates kind of ruined that plan by being close enough. But last year, Cole Reagans was the get for him, but his salary was less and he was a better deal, even though he didn't really perform as well as maybe you would expect for the Rangers. But hey, they won a World Series. And so I'm sure that GMs will give up any prospect, even Cole, for a ring. And so I don't think they're losing. Chris Young isn't losing any sleep over that either. But I think he put himself in a good position. I'm sure we'll see him do the same thing again this year. Maybe he'll go to the Marlins or somebody like that, where he'll just focus on himself for the first half of the year, and then hopefully get traded to a contender and play some October baseball. Where I think the Pirates overpaid for him, which I think did you hear the same thing that there was another team like maybe the Mets that had him at like 10 million, and the Pirates upped it a little bit and ended up signing him at the when they did. I think they probably overpaid considering for what they were planning on doing because I'm sure that they looked at that and said, well, hey, if we can spin him off and get that kind of a prospect, then we're in a better spot. And by if some chance we're still in it come the trade deadline, then okay, good for us. But yeah, I think that didn't exactly work out to either side's plan this year.
Yeah, why I don't know why you're getting in a bidding war against the Mets who can spend, you know,
Well,
exorbitant amount of money. And I know that I had heard before that the Brewers were also in there pushing the salary up, but they were sitting around like I believe it was like 7.5 to 8 million.
Well,
Um,
I'm in an auction style fantasy baseball league, and sometimes that just happens to you when you're bidding a player up, and you're just dead set. Hey, I'm gonna get this player. I don't care how much I have to pay for him. And I wonder if that happened for Charrington. It was like, well, what's another 500,000? Okay, we'll go. And then before you know it, $10.5 million for a reliever in Pittsburgh. And I'm sure that if anybody lost sleep over that deal, it was Bob Nutting because he's probably thinking, "What are we doing?"
yeah, 10.5 for a reliever. The next guy on the list, it actually is a guy I talked a lot of crap on throughout the season, and I think that Yasmani Grandal. I think there is still value in Yasmani Grandal, and I never thought I would be saying that. And people have to hear me out for this. And it's not a complete like, oh, Yasmani is great. Yasmani showed towards the end of the season in small spurts, he can still be a very good baseball player. And I think that's what he would be called upon to be, as opposed to being somebody they had to rely upon when Bart was injured, um, when basically, there was no other real options and he had to step in and play more than he needed to. He fell into that trap of, I am a bench piece and I am being asked to play way, way too much.
Mhm.
And people would say, well, wait a second, we have Henry Davis, we have Eddie Rodriguez. And I'm like, well, people already fell for the Henry Davis trap once. Henry Davis had a great, spring training and quote unquote won the job and definitely did work hard for that. But then came in and kind of fell flat. Andy Rodriguez is coming back from an injury and then was pulled from, his last start in the minor leagues because of arm fatigue, and do not think that he's going to even be able to jump in to be possibly in a backup role or a bench piece on the major leagues to start the season. I would picture him maybe being in, the minor leagues to get ramped back up. So you have Joey Bart and then you have, Jason DeLay. And I love Jason DeLay and he could fill that void as well. But I also think that the pitching staff kind of liked Yasmani Grandal for all of his faults and little things that he does wrong. He's never going to throw anybody out, which doesn't help some of our pitchers because they also are slow to the plate and will cause, a lot of that different stuff to happen. Obviously, everybody will go back to, blooping it back to Jared Jones and kind of, that type of stuff. But towards the end of the season, if you took his name away from him and you said that's your backup catcher and how he was performing, and you're probably going to have to pay him, $1 to $2 million a year. would you have that person as your backup catcher? And I would say absolutely every single time.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about. I know that they say that Pittsburgh wants to be have a defensive first catcher in the room. I mean, I guess in a perfect world, maybe you'd have a coach that can help handle the pitchers in a better way. But I think that for as much hate as you said Grandal got this year, look back to when Austin Hedges was here. He's getting the last laugh because he won a World Series last year, and he's still in the playoffs this year with Cleveland. So there's something to be said for value for those kind of catchers that can't hit their way out of a wet paper bag, which applies more to Hedges than it does Grandal, especially towards the end there when we saw him have a little bit of power. But I think that again, this is something that I bring up when we talk about the Steelers and the way things get handled in the locker room. I think that so much in professional sports happens outside of the view of the observer as a fan. We don't know what happened. I'm sure that Grandal was probably one of the first guys to come in the morning to look at film, to analyze, to game plan. Those things don't show up when you're turning on Sportsnet Pittsburgh at 6:30 and you're just watching the game. You're not seeing all of that goes into the preparation and how much that helps young pitchers. And that's something that I think that to a degree, as much as we love to, armchair quarterback a lot of this stuff, and it's fun to do and it's great, but the guys that are actually in the room that can see the work that's being put in, I think they deserve a little bit of benefit of the doubt when they see that kind of thing. And that's to your point, why a catcher like Grandal or Hedges or whoever steps into that role, you would hope that Joey Bart has had um, enough seasoning in the major leagues that he can maybe start to take some of that game planning role. But that's the importance that we see with those kind of catchers. And I think that it's important for every team that aspires to get the most out of their young pitching to have a player like that has experience, but needs to perform a little bit on the field too.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have to be Grandal. I just think that I like the comfortability he has, with the pitchers and with the team. And you mentioned the game planning piece because that's one thing I've heard, at least about him this season, is that he comes up and he is in that room and you look at it when Skeens' stuff isn't working and he starts going to other pitches and different stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of the things are, Grandal. I mean, it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes because we could remember, with Mitch Keller's cutter, like Grandal wanted to see that pitch work because he knew how good it could be. It, wasn't executed as well all the time. But I mean, he would just keep throwing it down there, especially, in spring training. I can remember a game where he just basically wanted to see Mitch just throw that cutter like 5 or 6 times in a row because he knows it's a pitch that can work. Everybody wants to see him ditch it, but I think that like thinking like at least outside the box or maybe in the box because that's where Grandal's behind there, but is thinking if we can make that type of pitch work, what type of pitcher he could be. And then one more free agent, quote unquote quasi free agent at this point in time, uh, it's Andrew McCutchen.
Yeah.
And I know everybody wanted Ben Cherington to say, yes, we're bringing Andrew back. Well, guess what, guys? That's not how baseball works, and this is free agency. He can't say, yes, we're bringing him back because Andrew has basically the right to go to any team he wants to go to. I wouldn't know if there would be some sort of collusion type of thing with that. I'm not like speculating or whatever, but I know that at least until the Pirates would have the first rights to him as, him playing on their team or whatever. But I don't think that you can even talk to agents or do anything at this point in time. So him saying if he's coming back, all he can say is, I hope he comes back. Our hope is that he comes back. Do you know what I mean? So like that was, I mean, you're picking apart. There's a lot of other stuff you could have picked apart in that press conference that was had, but that is not one of them. If Andrew wants to be back, Andrew will be back because Bob Nutting will want him back. So that one right there is just more, hey, Andrew, take a little bit of time off here, see how your body heals after
Right.
the season. Are you able to ramp back up and give it a go? If you feel like you can play, we'll get you on the field.
I think that the lack of fanfare for the end of the season really indicates that he will be back because you can't just let Kutch go out the way that this season ended. He deserves the Adam Wainwright farewell tour that we saw the Cardinals give him. And so I think that it'll be, like you said, rest up. He just turned 38 today, right?
Yeah.
Today's birthday. Yeah. So it's probably tough for a guy that I'm the same age, so I'm sure that after a whole summer of that kind of physicality, he probably isn't excited in September about re-signing exactly then while the season is still going on. And like you said, Bob Nutting has already said, as long as he wants to be a Pirate, he'll be a Pirate. We're not going to let him finish somewhere else. So go enjoy Christmas with your family. Maybe we'll talk in the new year. I think the mutual interest is so strong that that's not one that I'm worried about. Opening X one day and seeing Andrew McCutcheon sign some contract with the Cardinals to finish out his career. I just don't see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if he wants to be back, he'll be back. And yeah, we're winding down here. Probably gonna have to push off arbitration for you guys to have to come back, next week. We talked about the free agents, talked a lot about baseball, but like I said, off season is a long period of time. But we would be remiss if we did not talk about the Batman. He is Batman. To me, Michael Keaton is Batman. Yes, Christian Bale, I love all of those movies. I would put him second, but that was a completely different franchise, completely different run. Michael Keaton is Batman, and Michael Keaton is Pittsburgh. Like
Yes.
he represents, and we were talking about this beforehand, and we talked a little bit about it in messages and stuff. I could see the pain in his eyes, like as a Pirates fan, when Pat McAfee, asked him that question and asked him about the Pirates, and he genuinely doesn't want to talk about it because it's just so frustrating.
Yes, it's frustrating and painful. And just like, well, we were talking about how strong the ratings are in the Pittsburgh market, I'm sure that he's part of that generation that saw so much great baseball and just wants that again, wants that for to see again for himself, for maybe nostalgia purposes, for pride in the city of Pittsburgh. But also, he mentioned how big of a fan his grandson is. And I'm sure that he wants his grandson to enjoy great pirate baseball like he was able to enjoy. And yeah, it really is. I've always known him to be a Pirates fan, back to Three Rivers and all that stuff. And I knew he was from Pittsburgh. I'm not from Pittsburgh, but I'm from farther north. But I always associated him with Pittsburgh. Um, and I thought, well, okay, that's the connection. Like a Billy Gardell kind of thing. It's okay. That's one of our hometown boys. But really, to see, I've seen it on Seth Meyers, and now with Pat McAfee when the pirates come up, that really is near and dear to him and makes me love him even more.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, as you brought up, like I was thinking, like with he's talking about his grandson being a big Pirates fan and knowing the trades and knowing the drafts and stuff like that. Well, we know how our kids become fans and our, eventually grandkids become fans of a team.
Mhm.
Well, it's because you're that big of a fan of a team. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, it's not you know, if I wasn't, a big baseball fan, my kids may pick, whoever's hot right now. Like, I have a 13-year-old son, and usually what happens at that point in time, it's like, well, we like the Padres or we like the Dodgers because of this player or that player. It's
Mhm.
like, no, my kids are Pirates fans. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of ingrained and embedded in them. And for all people that want him to buy the Pirates, I'm pretty sure he makes a decent amount of money. I don't know if he has $1.5 billion sitting around, to purchase the Pirates. But I mean, the other piece of that is that, we're just in the national news again. And I mean, a lot of that is because of McAfee, from being a local boy from Plum. And like he's generally I feel like he's a Pirates fan as well. He tried to like play it off and just basically say, well, they've been bad, so that's why I went into football or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody says that only because they've broken your heart. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
I
mean?
think
It's
yeah, and I think his buddies there, I think they that hang out on the show too. I think they push it quite a bit. But yeah, he's going to be connected to Pittsburgh, in that way. That you can't escape that accent. And so
yeah.
you hear him talk, and you're like, "Oh, he must be a Pirates fan." Yeah, he's a
He's
Yinzer for
definitely
sure. He's the personification of Yinzer. He really is. But yeah, to see at least this is a more positive, I think, representation of the Pirates in the national media to show using a beloved pop culture icon, the Batman, as you mentioned, and to show that there is a passionate fan base that is hungry for good baseball, winning baseball in Pittsburgh, and I think speaks for all.